You've enjoyed your time worshiping here with us so far. Good news is we are just getting started. We're going to get ready to open up God's Word as we continue in this sermon series that we have called Fearless. Now, I know it's the beginning of summertime, and so some of you have been taking some vacations, including myself, and want to encourage you, if you've missed any of the messages in this series, go back. Check out our YouTube page, listen, watch these over again. I promise you, they will encourage you, they will challenge you, they will bless you. Pastor Daniel, Pastor Gary did a tremendous job the last couple of weeks, and I'm excited to be able to wrap up this series here with you today. But just in case you are new to Awaken or haven't been here in a while, let me tell you what we've been doing throughout this series. Okay, we have been going through this series, which is really focused on a short period of time. It's really the moment where Moses encounters God at the burning bush. And the reason why we've been in this series is we want to see how Moses stepped through fear, how he became fearless, and how he answered God's call for his life. And if you've been with us, then you know what we've learned so far is that he hasn't exactly gone easy. Right? Moses has been throwing out excuse after excuse, trying to get God to send someone else, anyone else other than him. And that even after God, speaks audibly to him out of this burning bush, even after God does miracle after miracle to prove his might to Moses, Moses is still pretty reluctant. It's kind of funny to us because we see it obviously with hindsight being 20/20, but in the moment, Moses is still like, I don't know. And what I think this goes to show us is really that no matter how God shows up, no matter how many miracles he even performs in your sight, that there will always be a fear factor when it comes to the things that he's called us to. No matter what he's called you to, no matter how many times he showed up in your life, fear is always going to be a factor when it comes to his call in your life. Why? Well, because faith is always going to be what's required for you to go anyway. That's actually the title of this morning's message, just those two words, go anyway. If you're taking notes this morning, I'd encourage you to write that down. Go anyway. Those two words, they remind me actually of a story of probably one of the dumbest and scariest things I've done in my life. Would you guys be okay if I told you a short story? Yeah. All right, cool. This happened back when I was 19 years old, back in the stage of life where we all do some dumb and scary things. And it started with a few buddies of mine. Okay, I've got a picture of my buddies. We weren't 19 here. This is several years later. This is after a few of us have gotten our act together. A couple of us still haven't. I won't name names because they're going to watch this later. But here's what happened. Okay, we're 19 years old, and we did what any 19-year-old guys would do, right? We're full of ego and adrenaline, and so we borrow one of the guys' mom's minivans, and we decide to take an epic road trip. Okay, we go from Southern California all the way up to Vancouver, Canada. Okay, now along the way we stop and we do all kinds of ridiculous things, almost all of which I'm forbidden to tell from this stage. So you have to catch me later for some of those. But one of the dumbest things that we decided to do, one of the scariest things we decided to do was to bungee jump off of a bridge. Okay, now don't get me wrong. This wasn't like from this place of confidence, right? This was from a place of like trying to impress your friends. The challenge was that when we got there, all the way up to Vancouver, Canada, and the time came for us to, sign on the dotted line and pay the money, guess who was the only one that did it? This guy. And it's not because I was brave, right? I was terrified. But the fact was that I was the one that suggested the stupid idea in the first place, and I was the one that was talking the biggest game, and so I knew that if I didn't do it, that I would never live this down. Okay, so here's what I did. I signed my name on the dotted line, right? I paid the money, I suited up, and then the time came, right? And I had to step out onto that platform. I'm not sure how many of you have ever been bungee jumping, but what may have seemed like a good idea at one point, once you get out there onto that platform, all of a sudden, not such a good idea. And let me tell you, what I didn't think about until that moment was that there was going to come a moment where I would stand on the edge of that platform looking 160 feet down, and that nobody was going to do anything to help me jump. There was nothing anybody was going to say. There was no countdown, nobody there to push me. I was going to have to do this on my own. And I remember looking down thinking, what am I doing? This is insane. Who would do this? Why am I doing this? But what ultimately happened is there came this moment where I was like, I either stay here stuck in fear or I jump. Right there, that moment is where we find Moses here in Exodus chapter 4. Not necessarily on the edge of a platform getting ready to bungee jump, but he's standing on the edge of a massive calling. God has asked him to do something that felt impossible. To go back to Egypt, to confront the most powerful leader on the face of the earth, and to take God's people out of slavery. And guess what? Just like me on that platform, Moses was not ready. Just like me on that platform, Moses, he probably stood there with some shaky knees, scared of what God was calling him into. But I truly believe that he realized the same thing I realized, that at some point you can either stay frozen in fear or you can jump. You could choose to go anyway. And you learn that really ultimately you're never going to feel quite ready to jump. But what God is calling him to do was to trust. Again, to go anyway. That's what this message, that's what this series is really all about. It's about choosing obedience even when you feel inadequate. It's about saying yes to God even when your knees are shaking. And it's about living fearlessly, not because you are fearless, but because you trust that God will be with you when you jump. This morning, we're going to look back to the story of Moses. We're going to see how he responds in the midst of his fear. And my prayer is that you too would make that decision to go anyway. To step through that insecurity. To step through that inadequacy. Into that great adventure that God has prepared for each of you. Because this story, like we've been talking about, is not just about Moses. It's about each of us. And how God is still calling people to say yes to his purpose. To step through fear into something bigger than themselves. So we're going to dive into God's word now. If you have your Bibles with you, I'd encourage you to open them up to Exodus chapter 4. Exodus chapter 4, we find Moses really on the precipice of stepping into that purpose that God has prepared for him. But as we're going to see, he's still not quite ready. Join me beginning in verse 13. Moses said, "Oh my Lord, please send someone else." There he goes again. Verse 14, "And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, 'Is there not Aaron your brother the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs.'" So here's Moses, right, again on that platform, ready to take that jump. And what does he say? "Lord, please send somebody else." All right, and let's just pause there for a moment, because remember, Moses has already seen the burning bush. Moses had heard the audible voice of God. He had literal miracles happen like right in front of him. Right, the staff turned to a snake, his hand turned leprous, and then it turned clean again. God gives him signs, God gives him assurances and promises, again, with his own audible voice. And still Moses is like, "No, please, not me." I wonder if you've been there before. If you've been in that place where God maybe whispers something to you, gives you some sort of next step that you're supposed to take, and you're like, "No, Lord, that can't be for me." Here's what's wild about this. God doesn't get mad at Moses and yank the assignment away from him. He doesn't get mad that Moses is insecure and take it away. Right? God could have done that. He could have said, "You know what, Moses, never mind. I'll find someone that's braver than you. Someone that's stronger than you. Someone that's a better speaker than you." No, he just says, "Fine, I'll send Aaron with you." God responds not with rejection, but he responds with provision. And it's crazy when you think about it, right? Because Moses, he didn't check any of the boxes that you would expect of a leader. And yet God still called him. Why is that? Well, it's because God's not looking for the most confident. God's not looking for the most competent. No, he's looking for the one who's going to be most dependent on him. So I know that some of you, I know even for myself, can't be the most confident, competent person. But that's not what he asked for. That's not what he's looking for. He's looking for the one who's most dependent. That's what we've been talking about all throughout this series. Right? That confidence, it looks like standing there with your chest out being like, I got this. Dependence, on the other hand, looks like when you step on the edge of that platform being like, "Lord, I can't do this unless you go with me." Dependence is that moment where your knees get a little shaky. Your voice starts to quiver a little bit. And what I love about those moments is that you don't have the ability to show up in those moments on your own. The only way that you're going to step forward is if God shows up and shows off his strength. Let me take a moment to make this, bring this a little bit closer to home. Something we've been talking about quite a bit, if you've been here over the last several months, is church planting. We are passionate about planting a church. About not just existing here for ourselves as Awaken, but about seeing multiple expressions multiply out of this place. And guess what? Thanks to y'all's incredible generosity back in November and December, we've got the funds ready, set aside. We've got a job posting already online for our first church planting resident. We are ready to go. And yeah, you know what happens when I have a conversation with some of you about church planting? Start to look at your shoes. When I suggest the idea that, hey, maybe this is just a temporary home for you, you're like, I don't know. I like it here. I think I want to stay here. I don't know. I'm not called to be a pastor. I'm not really the leadership type. Wait, let me just suggest something to you. I don't think God's calling you to run the entire race. I think for many of you, he just wants you to take that next step. Just to be open to these things. Open to a conversation. Open to the possibilities that maybe, just maybe, he could use somebody like you. Here's the good news. God's call on your life, it doesn't hinge on your confidence. It hinges on your obedience. Let me say that again. God's call on your life, whatever it is, it doesn't hinge on your confidence. It hinges on your obedience and his faithfulness to you. So it's not about whether or not you're scared, right? Fear is inevitable when it comes to God's call in your life. It's inevitable. He's not going to call you to something that you feel comfortable with. He just doesn't operate that way. What it's about is whether or not you're willing to say yes in spite of your fear. Whether you're willing to push past those nerves and that uncertainty to say, you know what, God, I will go anyway. Not because I've got it all together, but because I trust that you do. It's like I've been telling you, God doesn't call the fearless. He calls the willing and makes them fearless. So you can stop waiting until you feel prepared. Right? You can stop hoping for that magic moment when all the fear subsides, because I'll be honest with you, it's probably never going to happen. And you can say yes, you can trust. And what you'll find, right, when you step out of in obedience, is that God provides what you think you lack. It's my first point for those of you taking notes. First of 3 points, God provides what you think you lack. See, Moses, he finally decides to go, and it's not because his fear disappears. Right? It's because God, he meets him in the middle of his fear with something powerful. He meets him with provision. Right? God provides for him. Moses says, I'm not a good speaker. God says, okay, I'll send Aaron. Moses says, well, what if they don't believe me? God says, okay, here's this staff. Turn it into a snake. Maybe they'll believe you then. Moses says, well, what if Pharaoh won't listen? God says, I will put the words in your mouth. I love that moment because God's like, Moses, what else do you need, man? I will literally speak for you. Are you seeing the pattern here? Friends, God has a comeback for every excuse. He's got a provision for every possibility. He's got a solution for every insecurity. He's covered all of it. He gives Moses every single thing he needs. He gives him the words, the wonders, the tools, the backup guy, the signs, everything. All right, last week, Pastor Daniel, he reminded us that God wasn't flustered when Moses freaked out. Nothing about Moses' freak out flustered God. But what I want to do is I want to take things a step further and show you that not only did God not get flustered by it, God anticipated it and had already provided ahead for it. Well, why is that? It's because God doesn't give the assignment without providing the resources. God does not give any assignment without providing the resources for it. I mean, you can double check that. Look throughout Scripture. You will not see God call somebody to something and then be like, all right, dude, see ya. Good luck. No, he calls them to it, and then he moves heaven and earth to make sure that happens, to provide exactly what they need for what he has called them to do. This is why I have always said, it is my firm belief that God has given us as Awaken Church every single thing that we need to be the type of church he's called us to be. God has given us as Awaken everything, every person, every resource to be the church that he has called us to be. The only question is, have we realized it? Like, do we actually live into it? One of the clearest ways that God provides for us is through the giving of spiritual gifts. If you're new to the faith, really what that means is that not only has Jesus saved you, but that he is also equipping you to do the things that he has called you to do. That through the power of the Holy Spirit, you have been given a gift or multiple gifts that are meant to build and to bless and to strengthen the church. Not just the church, but this church right here. Like real, actual gifts. God-given gifts like encouragement and leadership and teaching and mercy and generosity and hospitality and discernment and so on. These are heaven-sent gifts that God has placed into your hands for the mission that we have been called to as a church. If you guys remember Pastor Daniel's message from last week, he asked you, right, what's in your hand? What has God given to you? Because God has given each of us a gift on purpose and for a purpose. And guess what? This church is not complete without what God has given you. This church is not complete without what you bring to the table. Think of it like a puzzle, right? Each one of us has been given a piece. Unless you bring your piece and add it to the puzzle, we're never going to realize that full picture. And I know some of you are sitting there thinking, yeah, but I'm not a preacher. I'm not a leader. I can't sing like Lindsay does. Nobody can. We think these things. I don't know how to lead a small group. I don't know what it looks like to plant a church. What I want to say to that is perfect. Guess what? You're hired. You can start next Sunday. When God calls someone, he calls them because he knows they can't do it on their own. What he wants to do is he wants to show off his strength through you. This takes me back to that bungee jumping platform I was talking about earlier. I was scared out of my mind up there, but do you know what I didn't do? I didn't inspect the cords. I didn't ask to read the manual. I didn't interrogate the guy who was kind of, hooking me all up. No, I trusted that what I needed was already in place. That's what faith is. It's trusting that what God is calling you to, he's already provided for. So it's not leaping because you're fearless. It's leaping because you know that God has already secured the rope. Are you with me this morning? It's leaping because you know that God has already prepared everything you needed even before you stepped onto that platform. So whatever it is that God is calling you into, even if you don't feel ready, you can be confident in knowing that God has prepared what you need to go anyway. So with that truth in mind, let me ask you a question, and I want an honest answer, okay? You don't have to answer to me, but just answer this one to God. Why are you holding back? What is it that's holding you back? I believe for each of us, we know that God has called us to something, and if you haven't stepped into that, why are you holding back? I don't want the surface level answer like I don't have any time, because you do. Trust me, I'll find you some time. I don't want the polished Christian answer either, like, I need a little bit more training, because we can help you with that too. What is it that's holding you back? What are you afraid of? What's that thing beneath the thing? Are you afraid you'll fail? You afraid you'll be exposed? You afraid that you're not enough? Guess what? God has already covered all those excuses. He's uncovered all of them. So if I can just say this with all the grace possible, don't be selfish. Don't be prideful. I stood in that place for several years, resisting the call to ministry. Oh, I'm not ready. I'm not a speaker. I'm not the leadership type. But I know now it was just my selfishness and my pride. What is it that's holding you back? Because I believe God's covered those excuses. I believe he's already prepared what you need. So you can go anyway. So we're going to see Moses finally do. Verses 18 through 20, it tells us this. Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive." Jethro says to Moses, "Go in peace." And the Lord said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking your life are dead." Now hear this part. So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the staff of God in his hand. So Moses, he finally leaves Midian, right? He decides to go anyway. But what the text doesn't tell us, what you can find by looking at just a simple geography, is that the distance from Midian to Pharaoh's courtroom or whatever, about 700 miles on a donkey. We're talking several days. Several days in the desert where Moses and Aaron and their family, they're not getting any signs out there. They're not hearing the audible voice of God anymore. They are just encountering hundreds of miles of silence and sand. Friends, this is what the journey of faith looks like. Yes, it takes a whole lot of faith to believe God when he calls you and when you hear from him what he has for your life. But where faith is really tested is after he stops speaking. Faith is tested when that journey begins through the silence and the sand. Let me give you just a quick example from my own life. Several years ago, when Lindsay and I felt called to move to Texas, it was not an easy call for us to answer for a whole number of reasons. But we were in this season where it just felt like God was like speaking to us. Like not from a burning bush, but where we were just getting quick answers to our prayers. We were getting just peace and discernment. All of these things were coming from him. And it almost made it kind of easy. But you know where our faith really got tested? It's when he stopped speaking. It's when we moved out here. And it was lonely. It was hot. It's once we encountered the silence and the sand. That's when we had to decide, are we going to obey even now? Even when it's hard? Even through the silence? Even through the sand? That leads me to my second point this morning, which is that faith moves when the fire fades. Faith moves when the fire fades. We see that in this story, right? That after the flames stop dancing, after the desert goes quiet, that Moses had to walk it out. He had to walk it out. There was no writing in the sky for him. There was no audible voice to guide him anymore. Just simple steps of obedience, one after the other. And what was expected of Moses then is expected of us now. The question is, are you willing to take those steps, even if you don't have all the answers? Are you willing to begin that journey, even if you don't know exactly where it's going to lead, or all the things that you're going to encounter along the way? See, I truly believe that there are some of you, maybe even many of you, who have been in a season of waiting, and God is calling you to start walking. I don't know what you've been waiting for. Only you can speak to that, but I believe God is calling you to take that next step. Maybe you even know the direction that God is leading you, and you've just been holding back because you can't see where the road's going to go. You've been holding back because you feel like you are inadequate, like you're not prepared for it. I don't know if you're waiting for a sign from heaven or from like a life map to fall down from the clouds, but I believe that God is actually just waiting on you to move. Let me explain what I mean, okay? Have you ever been like in your car and pull up your GPS either on your phone or on your dashboard, and it kind of has trouble figuring out where you are a little bit? Maybe it's just because I've got like an old iPhone, but mine, like, it does like this rotating thing. And it doesn't matter how long I sit in my car. If I just stay in the driveway with my AC on, it's not going to direct me to where I need to go. Why is that? Well, it's because the system, it was designed to guide you once you start moving. I believe God operates oftentimes the same way. Right? We pray, God, would you just show me the journey? And he's like, I will, but man, take a step first. Or like, God, I want to use my gifts for your glory. And he's like, cool, would you just like start by signing up to serve at church? He wants us to take that first step. He wants us to move, and oftentimes he's not going to show us more until we do. And it's not that he's being cruel. That's not it at all. It's that he's being a good and loving father, and he's teaching us to trust. He's teaching us to trust. It's because he knows, friends, that all the good things that he has for us in life are on the other side of fear, but he's not going to push us off the bridge. He wants us to be the ones to take that leap. So let me ask you just point blank, where have you chosen to wait where God is calling you to walk? What is that step, that leap he's calling you to take? Because if you're waiting, if you're holding out for a sign, if you're hoping that things will just become crystal clear, Or if you're like some people in church who want to make sure that their spiritual gifts test lines up with their Enneagram number and their college degree and like this perfect combination, it's not going to happen. Hate to break it to you. Because God's going to call you out of something, into something that you are uncomfortable with. That's not going to use all of your giftings and personality types. It's going to require you to lean on Him to come through. Every good thing that God has for you in this life is on the other side of fear. So what is that step He's already called you to take that you're still sitting on? What's that step? Because I can tell you there is a purpose and there is a promise on the other side of it. That leads me to my third and final point this morning, which is that your yes, it builds a future you can't see. Your yes builds a future you can't see. Look with me at the end of chapter 4, beginning in verse 29. It says, Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the people of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that He had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. So Moses walks it out, right? Through the silence and through the sand, stepping forward in obedience. And what happens? The people believe and they worship. This thing that Moses was convinced wouldn't happen, that God said would happen, it actually happened. Moses, he says yes, he steps through fear and things start to move. Momentum begins to build. And I know this might be stating the obvious, but none of this happened while Moses was making excuses. None of this happened while Moses was sort of wavering on like, is this God's calling on my life? Do I have the education for this? Am I built for this? No, these things only happened after Moses decided to go anyway. And what these verses show me, and what I hope they show you, is that God is already working on the other side of your obedience. God is already at work on the other side of your obedience. See, while Moses was wrestling in the wilderness, God was stirring hearts in Egypt. But while Moses was doubting, God was preparing Aaron. And while Moses was afraid to speak, God was already preparing people to listen. So I know that your obedience, it might feel like a small step to you. I get that. But your yes, it's building a future that you can't see yet. Your seemingly small little step of obedience is setting into motion a divine course of events that God has already put into place. I want you to think of it this way. I don't know how many of you ever played with dominoes as a kid. I'm not talking like the actual game where you're competing with somebody. I'm talking where you like set them all up like one by one and then you push them and the whole chain reaction thing. Anybody do this as a kid? Yeah. It's beautiful, right? It's beautiful, but if you were to see one single domino, it's not much on its own. The power is in the chain reaction. That simple, small step of obedience is like that single domino. And what I love is that yesterday at VBS, Pastor John, he actually gave this same illustration. He didn't know I was using it this morning. And I love that because it doesn't matter if you're 6 years old or 60 years old. The call is still the same. The call is to step up, to play your part, to make disciples, to lead, to serve, to be obedient, even in spite of your fear. Why? Well, because there are neighborhoods, there are families, there are cities that are waiting for your yes. Just like Israel was waiting for Moses. And sure, you may not see the results right away. You may never, ever see them. But what if your simple step of obedience this year leads to a breakthrough for somebody else in the years to come? What if your yes today sets the next domino in motion? Because y'all know the truth is we're not building something here just to show up on Sundays. We're building more than what's going on here during the week. We're building more than just a church for ourselves. We are stepping into a mission to reach people who don't yet know the freedom that's found in knowing Jesus. And some of you are being called into that in a very real way. Not to have all the answers, not to be perfect, but to say yes. Because when you say yes, God moves and people are set free. So listen, don't underestimate your obedience. Don't underestimate those small steps because you have no idea the future that God's prepared ahead. Your yes, it builds a future you can't even see yet. So here's my challenge for you as I wrap up this morning. Even if you don't have it all figured out, Even if you don't feel ready, go anyway. Go anyway. Take a step. Move forward in faith, because faith is not about certainty, friends. It's about trust. And your obedience today, it might just lead to somebody else's freedom tomorrow. That's what happened with Moses. Not because he was fearless, not because he was eloquent, but because at some point he just decided, you know what, Lord, I'm going to go anyway. And I believe God is calling some of you to do that same thing today. Maybe that's to say yes to Jesus. Maybe that's to serve. Maybe that's to lead. Maybe that's to plant. Maybe that's to pioneer new communities of faith. But for each of us, I believe it's the call to say yes, even if you're unsure. Again, there are neighborhoods, there are cities, there are families that are waiting for you to say, you know what, God, I'm willing to step through fear. I'm willing to go anyway. Some of you may end up leading a life group. Some of you may plant churches. Some of you may support. Some of you might be sent. Each one of you has a step to take. Each and every one of you has a step that you can take here today. And I know it might sound scary. I know it might not make any sense. Trust me, I've been there. Not just on that bungee platform, but when I said yes to pastor in this church. What I found in both occasions is that God showed up. What I found in both situations is that what I needed was already in place. You know, it's funny because when I jumped off of that bridge some 20 years ago, those carabiners that held me in place, they did nothing to erase my fear. But they gave me just enough courage to jump and to go anyway. Today, I actually want to offer you a little symbol of that same kind of courage. At these tables over here on the left and right, you're going to see a little carabiner. It's got that word fearless on there, and really this is meant for you just to keep, to take, to put somewhere where you're going to see each and every day on your keys, on your bag, whatever it is, and be reminded that you may not be fearless, but that you can make that decision to go anyway, to put your trust in God, that He's going to provide everything you need, that He is already working way ahead of you. He's covered every excuse so you can go anyway. As we prepare to respond in worship, I actually want to ask you to do two things for me. First thing, I'm going to put a QR code up on the screen behind me. Last week, almost every single one of you raised your hand when Pastor Daniel said, hey, are you willing to surrender what God's put in your hand? This week is about accountability. It's about encouragement. Go ahead and pull your phones out right now, scan that QR code, and answer that question for us. What step is God calling you to take? I see a lot fewer cell phones than I saw hands last week. There we go. We want to walk with you. We want to pray with you. We want to equip you. We want to encourage you as your church family. Again, it could be saying yes to Jesus. It could be, just saying yes to serving, to leading a life group, to pastoring. It could be something outside of these church walls, even outside of this community. What is it that God is calling you to do? What is He asking you to say yes to? Don't let this moment pass. Let this be the day that you name your next step and that you take it. Second, after you've scanned that code, come make it real. Come up to these tables on the right and the left and grab this symbol of your yes. Take this, keep it in front of you as that declaration of you saying, you know what, God, I might still be scared. Would you make me fearless? Help me to trust you as I step forward in faith. Awaken Church. Let's respond in worship. Let's jump together.